Welcome all to another episode of Legal Tech Week, show where we talk about what happened this week, top stories this week in legal tech and innovation. My name is Bob Ambrogi. I write the blog Law Cites and have a podcast called Law Next. And our other panelists today, who wants to kick it off? Stephanie, you want to kick us off with introductions?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Wilkins. I am the Director of Content at Legal Tech Hub, and there's crazy construction going on in my building right now. So if you hear really weird noises, I'll try to mute myself, but hopefully the ceiling's not caving in on me.
All right. Steve?
Hi, I'm Steve Embry. I write the blog Tech Law Crossroads. I guess I could say I'm the director of legal content there as well, along with all the other jobs. Yeah, right.
All right. Niki?
My name is Niki Black. I am the Principal Legal Insight Strategist at Affinipay, parent company of MyCase, LawPay, DocketWise, and CasePeer. And I write legal technology columns for ABA Journal Above the Law and the Daily Record. And I also author and work on our legal industry report. We just got the final draft copy edited, and it's sent to creative team to
ChatGPT?
No, the actual people. So it's exciting. It should be coming out in a couple months, 2 months. So excited about that.
All right. And Joe?
Joe Patrice from Above the Law and the Thinking Like a Lawyer podcast. I am, and I write about legal tech as well as a bunch of general interest stuff. So I have not done as much on legal tech this week, as you'll find out when we start talking. But I'm trying to keep up.
All right. Yeah, it's actually funny, Niki, that little joke about sending it to ChatGPT. I don't know if you just saw it. I don't know if I have it. Well, I can talk about it later, but somebody was talking about how they're using, Colin LaChance was talking about how he used the new deep research tool. I've got some stories this week I was going to talk about the new OpenAI Deep Research tool. But he was talking about how he used it to basically update an old survey he had. He uploaded this survey from a couple of years ago and said, "This is the baseline. Can you go out and do the research and give me updates to it?" And it looked like it did a pretty good job. Kind of interesting.
Speaking of ChatGPT, just an FYI, word on the street is that there's been a significant breach and that everybody should change their passwords and turn on dual factor right away. Figured I just mention that. We got a message about that, and we're all asked to do that because it's making its way through all the IT people and they're spreading the word. So I would recommend that you do that if you use ChatGPT.
All right. It's good to know. All right. Well, where to start this week? Stephanie, I thought might actually be interesting. You were on the road a little bit this week at a conference that sounded really interesting, and from what pictures I saw, looked really interesting. Want to start there and tell us about it?
Yeah, kicking off the conference season, it was awesome. So I was at the first ever Women Plus AI Summit at Vanderbilt. Some people were following it. It was super impressive in how it even came together because Kat Moon at Vanderbilt threw out the idea in November of doing this Women's Summit in AI. It wasn't strictly legal. I mean, there were a fair number of legal people there because it was at Vanderbilt Law, but there were people from other industries too. And it just started with a Google form saying, if you would be interested in an event like this, put your email on the list and we'll go from there. And that turned into pulling off a conference 2 months later, entirely volunteer. Everyone that spoke volunteered to speak. They didn't have to charge anyone to attend because enough sponsors stepped up for everyone to go and have it be free. But it was just a really, really great day of amazingly smart women across disciplines. And it was a mix of, Kat did an opening talk about, she basically started with a slideshow of a bunch of news headlines, none of ours, basically saying they all were doom and gloom headlines about how women will never get ahead in the AI race. I think it was just endless press about it. And one of them even had a picture of golden urinals and stuff like that. And so it went from there. And the whole concept of it was well, fine, if everyone says we can't get ahead, we'll have to do it ourselves. And so that was a great talk. And then there were a series of breakout sessions you could go to, your choices, but then there were sessions of shorter, what they were calling ACE talks for like action community empowerment. And it was like 5 to 7 minutes. Like I did one, just telling your story with AI, a little something to sort of encourage everybody else. And, mine was more about finding my voice in the AI space since I started this journey. I joined this crew like 2 months before ChatGPT came out and nobody knew who the hell I was at all. So like that trial by fire and like basically being like, like if you haven't found your voice yet, it's not too late, and just don't be afraid to drown out other people's voices if you know what you're talking about, because they'll drown out yours. But it was just a really great day of like, it's hard to explain. It was one of those conferences where like this the atmosphere, and there was like an energy about it that you can't quite put into words, because everyone was just, I think everyone was well rested after a little bit of a lull in the conference scene, but then also just being there, and it just felt like this. I mean, I don't mean safe space in a way that's like threatening, but it was just like nobody, like everybody was just so comfortable. Like people came in like whatever they felt like wearing, and they talked about whatever they felt like talking about. And there was constructive debate without anybody talking over each other or like cutting each other off. And it was just all super constructive and great and brilliant and so well received that they're already planning more of them. And I'm just like, I would speak again. Like I already know a talk I want to do at the next one. And like it was just so fantastic. And like it wasn't all legal. Like, oh, I went to a session of a woman from WebMD who was talking about how AI can actually be used in women's health issues and getting out, information. Cause, I mean, I won't get on my soapbox about women's health in this country, but it needs some help.
No,
It was just
good.
all,
I want you
yeah,
to do it.
yeah. It was all, I mean, it was just such a great, fantastic day.
I've been to a couple of things Kat's done down there. And they're always great. So
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that it was such a great conference.
Who were
Yeah.
sort of from the legal world? Who were I don't mean who literally by name. I mean like what types of people were there? Were they entrepreneurs? Were they legal professionals, practicing lawyers? I mean, who was there?
I feel like most of them would fall in sort of like the legal tech space, whether, from vendors or from various service providers. I mean, I think there were some law firm people there too. But some people building it. I know Querius, that's one of the companies on the short list for the finals for the Startup Alley, right? She spoke, like
Yeah.
Cara Peterson spoke, Christian Trailer from Relativity spoke, but then like in the longer sessions, like Kat Casey did one on like more of like an intro for people who like needed to get better at prompting. Kim Bennett from Fidu did one on the funding gap in legal, or in any AI startup, not just legal. So it was a lot. I mean, it was a good mix of those kind of people, but not usually the people that you don't see all at the same conference. You see, the e-discovery people at this conference or this one, or if they're all at a legal week, it's so giant you don't see them. So it was a good little mix. But yeah, there was some like Hush Blackwell people that spoke. Like Carolyn Elephant was one of the co-hosts, and she did a great talk too. And just a lot of fantastic people, and people from Vanderbilt also.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Absolutely. It was, and it already sounds like they're going to do more. They're definitely doing one in Australia in the summer, but it sounds like they've talked about like London and Paris, and like, so it's going global. There's a movement.
Sounds good. There's always a little bit of like a different energy around a first conference too. I think people are, sort of maybe the more established conferences maybe you sort of come to it with pre-built expectations or something, and when you're coming to a conference when everybody's coming to a brand new conference for the first time, there's sort of no formula that they have to follow, no template they have to follow, and it probably makes it a little more creative and interesting.
And I was sitting around with a group of people, so it was a non-scientific poll, but it was like a fairly large group of us afterwards just chatting about stuff. And someone was like, have any of you ever been to a women's tech conference? And we all said no. Like, I've been to a women's conference. We've all been to tech conferences. And we're like, I know other industries maybe do it, but we were like, it was a super interesting I mean, I hadn't stopped to think about that. I had never been to one, and it was just like
Hmm.
this great little space, and it really felt needed right now. And that's as far as I'm going to go in my politics. But everyone was like, "We need this right now."
All right. I can just see Joe and Steve thinking we need a man in AI conference, right?
I mean, I think it's called Doge.
Yeah.
I think it's called Doge.
Nice.
Bro, big balls? No, what was it called? What was the guy's name?
Yeah. Well, while we're on that subject, I just wanted to share my favorite.
Which subject?
We're gonna go with the Doge part. But my favorite, tweet of the last 24 hours was this whole Doge. They think they can take over and they can fix the world, whatever. This messianic tech bro mindset is everywhere, and apparently it's not just Elon. It's like a lot of Silicon Valley has this mindset, and the one of the early directors at Roblox, the video game, wrote something like Silicon Valley made the modern world. Why shouldn't we run it? And some genius, and I can't remember his name, but some absolute genius retweeted it with, I invented Roblox, give me the nuclear codes, which is basically the world. That's my favorite tweet of the last 24 hours. That sums up everything. I invented Roblox. Let's go.
What did the guy's name start with a G? I read about him. The guy who, there's some guy who wrote a book that they all think is like, and this idea, it was the
Oh,
idea of no longer having government and having little corporate entities everywhere that are run by these tech guys, and people can just hop from one corporate city to the next if they don't like living in the way the one's being run. But you have no voting and no
yeah.
representation. You just live in these little fiefdoms of these dumbass tech pros running it.
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful. I can't wait. I'm excited for this future.
Well, since we're on, what was the reference? There's a reference in the chat, Joe, to something you wrote in the conspiracy theorist taking over the U.S. Attorney's office. I don't even know what that's. I didn't see that post.
Yeah, actually. So Ed Martin is the interim for now, but I'm sure he'll end up elevating eventually. Interim U.S. Attorney for the District of D.C. He has fired bunches of career prosecutors for being involved in January 6th things. He is part of the attempt to purge all the FBI agents who were involved in that. And what he has been doing, as opposed to like prosecuting crimes or the things you would normally expect, he originally was how he came to prominence. He was one of the people whipping up the crowd for January 6th festivities, and he spent a lot of his time representing as defendants January 6th people. And then he got this job and actually signed dismissal papers for one of his former clients, which seems like a problem. But he also, the particular article in question was about how instead of actually prosecuting stuff, he has been writing love letters to post on X of how he's doing his part to help out Elon. They're really kind of embarrassing and things that you would very much unbecoming of the office. But like, this is what happens when you take a stop the steal conspiracy theorist and give him this sort of power. And he's writing stuff to Elon like, we will protect your ability to, stop anybody who's trying to slow you down, sir. Just really obsequious.
All right.
And I will say, I will write an article. I just haven't gotten around to it of my bigger takeaways of that conference. But my column this week was sort of a little bit of a love letter to legal tech conferences in general. And as people say in the comments in there, I remind you that's the last day to vote for Startup Alley. So I'll plug that over to you both. But I'll drop that in here. It's my little why I'm excited about conference season.
A love letter to legal tech conferences. All right, I gotta read that.
I know. I mean, I didn't intend it to
me
start out
too.
that way, and then there we are.
And actually, also on the point of Women of Legal Tech conference, Mark Palmer points out there had been one. I don't know if it's still on at all, but there had been this summit for I think a couple of years in a row before Tech Show.
That's awesome. Yeah,
That
was
would go on.
dates me, but yeah.
That wasn't strictly women in attendance, but really focused on that, and that would be where they'd announce the Legal Tech Research Center. That's not what it's called. LTRC, the Legal Tech Resource Center, the ABA would announce their the Women of Legal Tech every year at that thing, I think.
I'm always in the
Using
other
my conference.
camp about that. Not a lot of women are in the camp I'm in, but I think that when you have women only this and women that, I mean, I understand the idea of a conference with just women, I understand the benefits. But I think that when you have these women's awards and women articles about women CEOs and women this and women lawyers and women that, it makes it seem like we're not part of reality, like we're not part of the actual industry that we're supposed to be part of. And then we're just special and addition and other rather than literally more than half the human population. Like it's, and so I tend to shy away from, I don't like getting nominated for women only this, or asked to be in an article or featured in a thing or on a panel. Like, I don't like it when it's just women only and it's specifically about women and the whole boss lady women thing. I feel like it denigrates women. And I'm not saying that conference does, and I can understand the appeal of it, but it always kind of, whenever I hear those things, it makes me just sort of wince a little bit, because I think in some ways it's counterproductive to women being included in spaces.
I mean, wait. No one's part of reality, Niki. It's all a simulation. Remember that.
But I totally get where you're coming from, because I even said this weekend that I was the one that would originally, like, as soon as anyone said women's conference, I would side eye it and be like, I don't need to do trust falls and I don't care. But then, like, I started to change my mind when I went to Whipple at ALM, which, I mean, I went because it was my job to go, and I was like, oh, this one's done well. And then this one this weekend, especially because it was born out of the whole, like, it was literally, like, she's like, post-election, she was like, this is going to be a shit show for us. No one's going to help us. We're going to help ourselves. So it had a different impetus behind it. But I totally get you, because for the longest time, I was also in that camp where I was like, I don't need to just like go to this ladies event, you know? Also, it was run by women, which is helpful.
And it
But
definitely,
there is, I mean, when you have a male-dominated power structure, whatever it is, whether it's legal tech or whatever industry you're in, and where so much of the focus of media and everything else tends to be on powerful men doing their thing, it makes, to me, it makes sense to make it sort of an effort to highlight other people, whether it's women or people of color or whatever else it might be, just to make sure that there is light being shown on all sectors of an industry or a community or whatever else it is. Because otherwise it just doesn't kind of happen naturally, I think.
I don't disagree that it makes sense to highlight, go out of your way to ensure that you're including them. But I find what happens when you have women who are CEOs or successful women attorneys is they only get featured on the women CEO list. They don't get included on the list of successful CEOs. Like or there's a single one added just to make sure that it looks diverse, you know? And the same with people of color and whatever else. They're like, they can be celebrated over here. And this is their spot, so we don't have to include them in our actually list of actual CEOs that are doing things important. And they get sidelined. And so the intentions are good. And this conference is different than those lists and those, you know, it's not quite the same thing. And it's distinguishable. The goal of starting this particular conference was also different. It wasn't some man saying these women need a conference. It was women saying women need a conference.
Yeah, it was kind of like, if you're going to keep sidelining us, screw you, we're going to go off on our own, which is why, and that was just sort of like a palpable thread through it, which is why I think everyone, like, it felt so good. And the comment, like, there were men there, but there were maybe 3 men there, I think, that I saw. And it was like sponsors.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Well,
and-
Legal
and
Tech
yeah, if
Week is
you're-
putting an official end to DEI from now on, I think.
Oh. Well, and yeah, like as far as men going to those sorts of conferences, when the tone of the conference is set that this is about, you know, networking and community, with this, you know, with this kind of undercommonsy vibe, then those folks, you know, they aren't necessarily of that community, but they are kind of by necessity put in a position of allyship where they aren't driving things at that point because the tone has been set without them. So it's not, you know, it's not quite the same, and it puts checks on their ability to kind of hijack it, I think.
Well, and the 3 men who were there were very, very clearly like vetted and invited by Cat Moon,
Right.
you know, like. And it's kind of joyful to know that they had to sit through a session on using AI to talk about menstruation and menopause, and they weren't allowed to squirm out of it. It was great.
I want to be clear. I brought that up not to critique this conference, but to just bring that point up generally. Not, it wasn't really targeted at this conference or the motivations or the fact that you enjoyed it and that the people, you know what I mean? I didn't mean to I wasn't trying to target that. I was just trying to bring up this other issue that I think is important to also talk.
And I agree. I come very strongly from that space too, but I'm starting to come around. Anytime I do a women's thing, I would definitely look at who is throwing it and why. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But it is a sort of a timely topic, kind of given what's going on in the world. And I don't know. I'm a great believer in the idea that people who have a common experience, they can benefit from bringing their voices together and kind of amplifying their voices in a way that makes sure that down the road it isn't just seen as a women's CEO over here or something else. I mean, I don't know. I think it makes a lot of sense to have that kind of a
Oh, and there were
conference.
high school students there too, which is always
That's nice. Yeah,
And they're
that's
not,
cool.
their voices are not heard enough either.
yeah. I mean, yeah, they're doing
Um,
stuff and like they have goals
I
and
can,
foresight. They're doing hackathons and things in high school when I was like, what? Yeah, it's
I
always
can, I can certainly understand why you would not ask high school boys to attend.
uh, uh, all right, where do we go from there? I don't know, but I'm looking at our list of stories saying nothing follows from that one. Um, so we can at least jump from the Department of Governmental Efficiency to the topic of funding freezes and the impact on access to justice, and maybe talk about Niki's story.
All right, so I've been covering access to justice and its intersection with AI quite a bit lately, and I thought I was done. I thought like I'd kind of covered all of it. But another thing that I also cover is because I'm a New York attorney, I've written about the intersection of New York ethics, opinions, and technology for a long time now, often covering it for the Daily Record. And so I always check the opinions to see what's if there are any that are interesting to write about. And so there are actually two, one of which I wrote about for this article that I just shared, and then I also wrote about one for the Daily Record. But this one was, I thought, really interesting. It was an ethics opinion where the nonprofit legal organization that represented indigent defendants in criminal matters sent in an inquiry asking if they could start a GoFundMe to raise funds to in support of one of the criminal defendants in one of the cases. I can't. And it was interesting to me because
To help us transition back into the community, right after incarceration, was it a post-incarceration relief or something like that, or?
that is a good question.
So I thought you said, I may have misread that.
No, you may be correct. I had focused more on the conclusions rather than the which were more general, not specifically related to that exact fact, the factual pattern. But I thought it was interesting stumbling upon this though on the tail of all the funding cuts to federal agencies in general, which is obviously going to impact LSC and other federal agencies that do provide funding in all these different ways to all these different organizations. And I've always been a proponent that I think, I've been cynical that technology is going to be able to solve this problem, and have always believed that truly it has to be a funding issue from the federal level. So the fact that all those federal freezes are in place, is alarming, because it just makes me depressed and think that this issue is never going to get solved, even with AI chipping away at it. So when I saw this ethics opinion, it was really interesting. And it was like another approach. And so I thought it was interesting to kind of cover it in conjunction with all of the other sort of different ways of trying to build this bridge of access to justice with a multiple pronged approach. And this was just another another tool in the arsenal, or in the arsenal to help achieve that goal. And so I think it's just interesting to see you know, and it gave me a little bit of hope. Like there's more than one way to address this issue, and lots of people think it's important, and hopefully we can like chip away at the challenges we've got with access to justice. I don't know, but it was an interesting opinion. And oh, there we go. Intended to help the organization raise funds for the. Oh, okay. Somehow that actual, I think that was even in my article.
Yeah, I just copied that out of your article.
Okay. Oh, but I glazed over like the second half of that sentence, and I was more concerned with the general concept, you know?
Yeah. But no,
Um,
I thought it was interesting. Firstly, I've never seen a case like that. I mean, an ethics case like that involving a GoFundMe thing. It's like sometimes these ethics opinions like leave you wanting for more details. I didn't read the full opinion, but I was kind of curious, like why the legal services agency had to set up the GoFundMe in the first place. Like, why couldn't they just advise the client on how to do it, or the client's family or something? I don't know. I was kind of curious why it was that they decided they needed to actually run the GoFundMe campaign, but still, it was an interesting case.
yeah, and I was just, I love how technology in so many different ways intersects with the practice of law. And I'm always sometimes surprised at the ways that it does that I couldn't have otherwise predicted. And this is one of them. I just don't think when I saw the description of the opinion, I was like, wow, I'm going to dive into this one. And it just sort of really caught my interest. And it's just important that there are people that are passionate out there that are in it and that are trying to solve these problems. And by writing about it, hopefully I can draw attention to the problems, even if I clearly am not paying attention to the actual underlying issue of the case. But, at least I copied and pasted it in there well. No, I think I've had my head so deep into the industry report and the editing that everything else is a little bit of a blur around it. So I think that's part of the problem, what happened with this. But
All right. Well, I'm going to stick with that Department of Governmental Efficiency theme for just a minute, because one of the things I wanted to talk about this week was how I was playing around with this new deep research feature that came out from OpenAI this week. On Sunday they announced it, and first thing Monday morning I got a text from somebody who works in a high level position at a legal AI company, basically saying, "Wow, this thing is really cool, and this could be a threat to a lot of existing legal AI companies right now." So I decided to give it a try, and if you have like the $20 OpenAI account, that doesn't do it. You need the $200 account. So I shelled out $200 to get this tool. But then for all this week, I've been kind of playing around with different experiments to kind of see what I could do with it. And the whole idea is this is a sort of autonomous AI agent that will go out. You give it a research request, and it will go out and conduct the research on the internet and go to multiple different sources and pull information from those sources and put it all together in a memorandum or whatever it is that you're asking it to do, and complete with links to all the sources and compilations of all the sources. And it's pretty cool. You can like watch it while it's working, and it will give you little messages sometimes like, "Oh wow, I didn't know that." It's like these really funny messages, but it can take a while. Like the ones I did, none of them took more than 15 minutes, but it says it can take hours or even a full day sometimes to complete a research request. But like the first thing I did was to say, okay, the Trump administration has just ordered the cessation, or at least the temporary cessation of all these grant programs. So I asked it to research the legality of that. And it went out and produced this extensive 9,000 word or so legal memorandum analyzing sort of the history and the background and the facts and everything else. Again, without me telling it in any way where to look or what resources to use or anything else. And it was awfully, I didn't check sort of the legal accuracy of what it produced, although it sure sounded right. Its ultimate conclusion was that the temporary pause on federal grants and assistance appears to rest on shaky legal ground. While the executive has some authority to coordinate and review spending, the breadth of the freeze and its indiscriminate nature conflict with core legal constraints. And it goes on and on to say this is basically not a cool move. That the president cannot unilaterally withhold appropriated funds absent specific statutory authority, and on and on. So that was really interesting. It's interesting to see the sources it uses because it's just using available open internet sources, and there's a whole lot of like citations to JD Supra, which I thought was really funny. I realize there's a lot of good materials in JD Supra, but it seemed like an odd source to be citing to. It pulled a lot of the cases it cited to. It pulled out of like FindLaw or Legal Information Institute or other public sources. But I kept thinking if you had the power of this technology, just were able to point it toward a specific or several maybe legal databases that are right now behind paywalls, it really would have produced some amazing results. I did over the course of the week. I published two other posts. One where I said I made it up, but I said I'm a 4-lawyer firm in Massachusetts, and I'm looking to pick a law practice management software. Can you go out and can you recommend what would be the best software for my firm? And again, it went out and it conducted a lot of research, a number of links to places such as Tech Law Crossroads and Legal Tech News and some of the sources that may be familiar to us here. And came back and produced this whole report on what it thought were the top 5 choices, and set out a little table of sort of summarizing all the information. 10 minutes for it to do that in extensive detail, feature comparisons, that sort of thing. And then I just published one this morning where I asked it to compile all the ethics opinions on generative AI. I'd love to compare notes with somebody who has a complete list. Niki, I don't know if you have a complete
Well,
list
I
somewhere,
looked
because
at,
I
I
don't
saw
know
that.
whether it was, yeah.
I saw that, and at my last count, I think I was up to 12, and so I think that one had 13, so it was pretty accurate. And it rung a bell with the ones that I recently just listed them again. I think maybe for I can't remember which article, but I just recently skimmed through the ones that I'd covered. So I think it was pretty accurate. I didn't cross-reference it.
You were a much cited source in it. I don't know if you noticed that. So it found you often. So I think it's just it was kind of fun to play around with it. I've been doing some other stuff with it in my actually using it in some real life applications as well in my legal work to test it out a little bit. But it's just another sign, I think, that of the potential for this technology to really be able to replace law firm associates for one here. I mean, I think this memorandum, again, if it was able to be generated based on other legal sources, legal research, based on more verified legal resources like a Westlaw or a Lexis or whatever, it probably would have been even better. But if you read it, you say, and also I wasn't thrilled. Its writing style leaves a little to be desired, but it wasn't that bad either. But as a starting point for anybody who's doing a multi-level, a 50-state survey of something, or just really wanting to dig into a legal issue or any other issue, really cool, I thought. So.
Well, and I saw that Mitch Jackson used it for something. He just posted about it on LinkedIn like an hour ago. Something really important, which was to predict the Super Bowl results. And the tool went on for like 15 pages. And if I correct, like I skimmed through it, and I think it said the Eagles were going to win. So you can put your money on the Eagles.
Actually, that's it's kind of an interesting use if you could employ it to assist you in placing bets and all these. I mean, the betting industry. I don't do it, but my son-in-law does it, and it's incredibly there's so many things that you can bet on, and so many different books that you can look at and engage this book versus. I mean, it was kind of a. He was telling me about it. It's kind of a complicated thing. So maybe this is an answer. I mean, I should recommend this to him. $200 a month, you know.
So Bob, you paid $200 to test it out?
Did.
You did? Really?
Yeah.
That's
And
expensive.
You could,
the name of journalism.
Name of journal.
Business expense, I guess, right? You wrote about it.
I assume
Yeah.
you can do it on a 1 month basis, just like the other
Yeah, I subscribe
ChatGPT
for a month.
tools.
I'll
Yeah.
I'll cut my subscription back back to my $20 level after this. But yeah, maybe that was
I
silly.
wonder if like the other tools at some point they will offer a version of it at a substantially reduced price.
Well, they said
Hope so.
it's going to be available in Pro at some point, which is the $20 one, I think.
The Pro is I think Pro is the $200 one.
Plus
Plus
the-
is the
Okay, well, it's
20.
going to be available, whatever they call the $20 one. It's going to be available there at some point. But
So there, yeah.
So, yeah. All right, so we've got more AI stories, right? We do have more AI stories.
What else is there to talk about, Bob? You know, I mean, each of us, there's 5 people here. We all have to have something to talk about. If we can't talk about AI, what are we going to talk about?
Well, fortunately, there's always more lawyer fuck up stories to talk about. So we could start there. Joe, you want to tell us about another lawyer fuck up story?
I mean, I assume it's AI also.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
no, it's a lawyer AI fuck up story,
Obviously.
and his name wasn't even Schwartz, right?
No, this is coming to us from down under. This is an Australia situation, but it's the most recent one, where the lawyer got himself in trouble for citing a bunch of fake cases and sending the judge on a runaround. The judge has referred him to disciplinary matters because because it's Australia, they were reading and the judge had to say that's not a case, this is a case. I think that all right, fine. I worked so hard to try and get a Bluey joke in here, and I couldn't figure out a way to get there.
Just
but
all the Crocodile One Dundee
the
references.
crocodile ones were good. Yeah, I got that. But the kind of extra angle I gave it, and this will be this should be inspirational for Niki because I think she talks on this subject a lot. The case involved was an immigration case, and my takeaway from it is, as we had this conversation a lot, don't blame AI for lawyers not checking their work. That's just laziness, and that is not same as if you just put up a bunch of cases without shepherdizing them or whatever. That said, this happened in an immigration case, and I don't know the details, obviously, from the story about whether or not it was a high dollar, like their version of H-1B kind of visa or not, but it felt as though this was the sort of situation where this was probably a low money, potentially pro bono sort of matter. And we talk a lot about AI and its potential for access to justice, which there is always something to that. It does open doors for people to access the law in different ways. That said, my concern, which is not so much an AI concern, but a facilitating natural laziness concern, is that this is the sort of problem that scares me because I think I think we're going to start seeing people not make stupid mistakes with AI as they learn more about it. But I think as that happens, those mistakes are going to increasingly happen down the economic food chain. No one is going to put in a brief with a bunch of fake cases, in a case that's worth a bunch of money. But all of these are going to be pushed further down, partially because pro bono is not billable, and so whether they think they don't need to care about it, or their bosses are telling them, "Please don't care about it. I need you back on your billable stuff," or it's going to be a situation where it's going to go down that down that direction just because those are matters that people tend to think of as more rote, despite and therefore easier to pawn off on AI when they aren't necessarily. These are all the concerns I have. So my takeaway from it, just because they flagged that it was an immigration case, is that it highlights the way in which, for whatever promise we seem to have for AI in access to justice, I think we're going to start seeing AI's hallucinatory mistakes be increasingly prevalent down the economic food chain.
I was actually thinking about that today. I think it's such an interesting point because it's almost like creating a tiered, even more than it already is, legal justice system, where you have people who can actually afford lawyers, which is going to be few and far between with the way that things are going. It's going to be even worse than it already is. And then everybody else who's using AI and trying to litigate on their own behalves through AI, or have people doing pro bono work, or public interest lawyers that are completely over, they have such huge caseloads they can't even see straight. And so there's going to be like this tiered system where people are actually getting careful, thoughtful representation from people who are lawyers who've studied and have experience, and then everybody else. And everybody else is going to get bigger and bigger, I feel like, as there becomes this sort of disparity between paid litigation and paid representation and not paid, free. And it's going to be, it mirrors the general direction of our culture across the board right now. And it's kind of terrifying.
There's two sides to that coin, though. I mean, you've written, as you point out in the article you did today, that you've written about how AI can be used to enhance access to justice. And so, like, on one hand, I agree that there can be this danger of this two-tiered or multi-tiered access to legal technology, access to these kinds of tools. At the same time, they are enhancing the ability of legal services providers to deliver services, enhancing the ability of self-help, of self-represented litigants to help themselves, I think. And I think the AI tools that are more focused on self-represented litigants or more focused on the legal services sector are just going to keep getting better and better. And so maybe that's going to help. It's a danger for sure, but it maybe over the longer term, it really can make a positive impact rather than a negative one. I don't know. I'm hopeful about that.
I think it all turns on whether you're pessimistic or like an optimist or a pessimist. And like my husband's an eternal optimist. I'm an eternal pessimist, so I always feel like everything's just going to go in the wrong direction. Doesn't always, though.
Why does everyone always overlook the realist? There is someone between optimist and pessimist. The other one each thinks the other one, everyone that isn't them is the other one, but realist, I'm strongly realist. Like everyone always overlooks that.
What's the real
I was just thinking as you were talking, Niki. I mean, could the future system be any worse than the one we have now? And I agree with you. The one we have now is getting worse, but that's not necessarily because of artificial intelligence tools or hallucinations. It's getting worse because of the economics that we live in. But the system that we have now without artificial intelligence is pretty piss poor. Yeah. Would it be any better with it or not? I don't know. Who knows? But it could be marginally better and still be piss poor.
This Richard Susskind quote in the chat, which is the right comparison is not to lawyer bespoke help, but to nothing, which I think is very true. Because that is obviously, this is a tool that for folks who need it, and this is the only access to justice they're going to have. This is obviously going to help a great deal. The concern is that to the extent that lawyers are involved in the process, for indigent or just not even necessarily indigent, just kind of that low bono tier, which is increasingly higher up as the cost of lawyers skyrockets faster than that. How many of those folks are put in a position where they're not, hard luck cases enough to get that free lawyer to look at, and filter the AI for them, but they're moving towards AI by itself, and that tier could get scary because, like, put aside that if they really have nothing, then yes, AI is better. But if they're in the position where they can get some kind of legal help, but it's not, sexy enough for the lawyer to spend a lot of time on when they also have to be working for JPMC on some big deal on the side, do they does the lawyer act lazier? Maybe, and that's more my concern, because I do think the promise of it is, yeah, you can get access for people who otherwise wouldn't get a lawyer. I have said over and over again when people ask me, like regular people, not in these circles where we're more sophisticated, but when regular people, yeah, but
we're irregular. We know, Joe.
when the normies ask me about AI
I
as
was about to say, the normies.
now we're the non-normies.
when they ask me about AI and using AI for legal, I always say the biggest advantage I think it has is it can tell somebody who doesn't know they need help that they need help. There's a lot of the access to justice isn't necessarily, oh, I didn't have a lawyer. It's, I didn't realize this was a thing I could get a lawyer to help me do. And so I think it's very useful for that, asking it, hey, my landlord did this and that and whatever, and I'm in New York. Like, is this the sort of thing I should call somebody about? Because a lot of people are afraid to even call somebody and find out. And maybe, it's useful for that. The worrisome situation, I think, more so than people having to depend on it, which is the Sefton scenario, which I agree, is the situation where they still are getting a lawyer, but the lawyer cares less and so is more lazy with it.
I think part of the imbalance also is, and I've talked about this before, I might have just talked about it last week, I forget, the whole funding issue, that there's so much VC money going into developing tech that's all focused on the customers that can pay a whole lot of money to buy that tech, on big law and big corporate. And it's just not a whole lot of money going into developing tech to address the access to justice sector or the legal aid sector. And I made the point, I think maybe I know whenever I attended the legal services conference, that their budget for tech development is $5 million for all the agencies that they fund. They give out grants every year that add up to $5 million, and $5 million is just a drop in the bucket when you're talking about developing tech for a large corporation or more sophisticated legal tech. So I kind of worry about this sort of the imbalance that occurs because the R&D isn't happening in terms of developing tech for these less privileged sectors, and how that plays out. But I mean, this has like been an issue within legal tech forever. This whole question of the extent to which tech does or doesn't kind of level the playing field for different players in the field. I mean, AI really kind of accelerates it and amplifies it, I think, in ways that it just hasn't been before. But it's always been kind of an issue, I think.
And I feel like we've talked about this when we've all been like on a panel together, where it always comes down to the word potential. And yes, there's this huge potential there, but then somebody actually has to put something behind the potential to make the potential a reality. And that's where things fall apart more. And I also always say that, I feel like we tend, not we, the normies, tend to fall into this more discussion of like, will this fix access to justice? And I was like, maybe we shouldn't start from all or nothing. Are we fixing the whole problem, as opposed to focusing on gradual progress and smaller wins, because nothing gets fixed massively. But yeah.
Well, maybe sort of related, Steve. You had an article this week, not that you did, but you picked up on an article from Judge Schlegel on developing AI kind of specific to the concerns of courts, I guess.
Yeah, it was an interesting article. A lot of his stuff most of us know Judge Schlegel. I have a lot of respect for him. He's a very thoughtful guy when it comes to technology, but he noted that Microsoft and ChatGPT now both have tools that can be used by governmental entities. The security is such that governmental entities like courts could safely use these tools, which of course is a little bit ironic, since, as Niki told us at the beginning, there's now been a ChatGPT breach, and so maybe the security is not what it is cracked up to be. But he was making the point that if these tools could be used by the judiciary, what a time saver it could be in reviewing documents, for example, or drafting repetitive orders, or managing calendars and all these sorts of things that has to take time for a lot of judges. work with, particularly judges in the state court system and Judge Shagel is in the state court system in Louisiana, who don't necessarily have the resources that federal courts do. And it was an interesting take. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is he compared how the Gen AI tools are being adopted with the cloud adoption. And he was pointing out that it wasn't that long ago that most judges kept all of their stuff on-prem. They didn't go to the cloud because they didn't trust the security of the cloud and whatever other ethically related concerns they have. And yet now, at least according to him in his blog post, it's fairly standard for judges to keep a lot of material and information in the cloud. And he was postulating that the adoption of Gen AI tools by judges may work out the same way. In a few years, it'll just be the status quo and what people generally do, what judges generally do. I thought that was kind of an interesting comparison. I hadn't really thought about it quite that way, but he does make some sense. The other thing that struck me in reading his article is kind of somewhat related to what Joe was talking about is if judges have access to these kinds of tools, it really will force the lawyers practicing in front of them to be a little more transparent and a little more honest in what they do or say. It's over the years, I had numerous examples, particularly in front of a busy judge, where opposing counsel would cite a case and make an argument that really was incorrect, that wasn't very well supported. And the judge really didn't have time to go do all the research and just was kind of trying to make a decision based on the representation of the lawyers, or how well they knew the lawyers, or how convincing they were. And I was thinking, I was reading Judge Sagel's post. Now a judge can say, "Oh, look, that case doesn't stand for that proposition." So, sorry. So it's maybe keep lawyers a little bit more on their toes in the courtroom if judges had this. So I thought it was a good article, and I always like reading his stuff. He's got a very nice blog that he posts maybe once a week or so. And how he finds time to do all this stuff is beyond me, but maybe he uses ChatGPT.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting post, and he is one of the few kind of sources for if you really want to be kind of following in a sense what's going on, how judges are using this stuff and how courts are using this stuff. And of course, he was one of the early innovators during the pandemic and getting
Right.
his court up and running on tech he kind of pulled together himself and was
Right.
able to keep his
In
court
an
running
affordable way too. He's
in an
very,
affordable
if
way.
you listen to him, he did a podcast not long ago on deep fakes where he actually cloned his voice to respond to the questions. I listened to the thing and started out, I thought, well, this is interesting. But the more you listen to it, the more it became kind of obvious. But he was making the point at how sophisticated the deep fake technology is getting it and is going to get. So yeah, he really is an interesting person in the technology spectrum.
Uh, we've got a minute here, and I just thought maybe it could be worth raising. So Caroline couldn't be here today, but she pointed out the story that she did, which I'll put in the chat. But interesting, basically covering a maybe slightly disgruntled founder who exited in a sale to Latera. And he had a CRM company that he sold, Upper Sigma, that he sold to Latera a couple of years ago. And then Latera had just this week announced its acquisition of Peppermint, which has CRM features. And this guy basically posted this thing on LinkedIn about saying, "Well, I learned a hard lesson, one I won't repeat." Basically about how well, I'm not entirely sure what his message was exactly. He's definitely expressing some regret about having sold his company, only to see it get kind of crushed and disappear a couple of years after being acquired, rather than have it grow and develop as he had hoped for it. He did add a little sort of postscript saying, "Oh, I've just heard from Latera, and they're not killing my company." But I don't know, a little bit of that, a little bit of seller's regret there, I guess, in that post.
Well, I thought it was really interesting because, having been part of a company, multiple companies over the years as I've gone along with my case and seen acquisitions, both, when Appfolio had acquisitions that had nothing to do with the legal side and also acquisitions along the way. Like there's all sorts of different things that happen when a company is acquired. And once your company is acquired, you don't have a lot of control over what's going to happen. That's part of the deal is you've sold your company. And
Right.
they may tell you all sorts of things, but as the business goals change, as new leadership comes in, as new companies get acquired, everything shifts and changes and different decisions are made, and that's just part of the deal. And I remember years and years ago when I was at Appfolio, Klaus Schauser, who was the co-founder of Appfolio, and also he was the founder of GoToMyPC and um, GoToMeeting. And at one point we were just talking about that general thing, and he gave me a book called Corporate Life Cycles, and it starts with like the founders, and then as the company grows and acquisitions and everything, and it talks about the personality types of founders and how they're very entrepreneurial, they're very charismatic, and like the reason that they're founders is because they'll like round people up and just wing it, and you need that when you're a founder because otherwise you can't get anything off the ground. But then as the company grows and scales, they don't have the right background, experience, temperament, personality to really do that because what they're good at is founding companies. And so often there's this schism, is that the right word? A conflict that happens. It's very common. And part of what people that are companies that acquire other companies need to do is understand the personality types, understand how to manage them at the point of the acquisition, manage expectations, because that stuff can blow up. And this is kind of unusual, this guy posting this stuff. Usually they just talk about it behind the scenes and complain at conferences, they don't actually publicly post it on LinkedIn, but he must have done that because he felt unheard, he felt like he'd been deceived, and he felt like no one was listening to him. And so he felt like he wanted his employees to know that this isn't what I thought was going to happen. So it was really interesting to see that, but it's a super common thing. I mean, I've seen it happen, and it's also in that book. It's just part of what happens when your company, you lose your baby to somebody.
Yep.
And I mean, technically, Latera's response is not wrong. Like, they don't do the same thing. Like, Upper Sigma is CRM built in Salesforce, and Peppermint is CRM built in Microsoft. But yeah.
But probably more of the question is where are you going to focus? Where are they going to focus
exactly.
as a company, and where's the product focus? But,
Yeah, no, but it's true though. I mean, like once you sell your company,
yeah,
I don't know.
that's it.
Yeah. I'll just say
All right.
unrelated, but as we're out of
Yeah.
time, if anybody in the audience or anyone here, I don't think any of you are going to the UFE Discovery Conference, I'll be there this week. So come find me, ping me.
All right. All right. Well, that does it for this week. Thanks to all the panelists for being here. Thanks to everybody in the audience for watching. And we'll be back next week. Talk about whatever happens then. See you then. Have a good week.
Bye.